life seemed like a dream. I was the envy of many, married to a beautiful, young woman named Emma. She was everything a man could ask for. Smart, elegant, and stunningly attractive. Our marriage, though recent, had quickly become the subject of admiration among our friends. Emma had a youthful energy that made me feel alive again, something I hadn't realized I needed until she came into my life. She was much younger than me, but we never let that become a problem. I had been married once before and had a son, Ethan, from that previous marriage. Ethan was in university now, right here in the same city where Emma and I lived. He was a good kid, bright and popular with the ladies, though he never took relationships too seriously. He had always been confident, the kind of guy other men wanted to be, and girls adored. I was proud of him, even if we weren't as close as I would have liked. Things seemed perfect, and I had every reason to believe they were. Emma and Ethan got along well from the start. She was only a few years older than him, which probably helped them relate. They bonded over casual conversations at dinner, and their friendship developed naturally, or so I thought. Emma worked as a professor at Ethan's university, teaching in the history department. It was convenient she'd often run into him on campus, and she'd always come home with some story about how he had made everyone laugh, or how well he was doing in class. I was proud of both of them and took it as a sign that our blended family was thriving. But things started to shift. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. It was subtle, small, almost insignificant things that I dismissed as normal life changes. Emma began spending more time at the university, staying later than usual to finish grading or attend late faculty meetings. Ethan, too, seemed to be hanging around campus far longer than he needed to, claiming he was studying late or working on group projects. I didn't think much of it. After all, they were both busy with their own lives. Then, one night, Ethan asked me for a favor. "Dad," he said casually, "do you think I could borrow some extra money? I've been trying to focus on my studies, and my dorm is too noisy. I was thinking of renting a hotel room for a few nights to really get some work done." A hotel room? It seemed odd, but then again, students often do strange things when they're stressed. I handed him the money, trusting that he knew what he needed to do. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder, why a hotel room and why now? Emma came home late that same night, much later than usual. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off with a tired smile, saying the faculty meeting had dragged on longer than expected. She kissed me on the cheek and went straight to bed. There was no reason to doubt her. I had no evidence of anything being wrong. The next few weeks passed uneventfully. Emma continued to come home late, and Ethan spent more time than ever away from the house. I chalked it up to them both being busy, trying not to let my suspicions get the best of me. But then, I stumbled upon something that made my heart skip a beat. I was sorting through some bills on the kitchen counter when I found a small receipt tucked under a stack of papers. It was from a hotel, a fancy one in the city, and the date matched the night Ethan had asked me for money. My first thought was that he had used the money as he said he would, to rent a room for studying. But why had the receipt ended up in Emma's things? A wave of unease washed over me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something wasn't right. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe she had picked up the receipt by mistake, or maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I started watching them more closely, paying attention to their interactions. The way they exchanged glances at dinner or laughed at each other's jokes suddenly seemed too intimate. There was a closeness between them that made me uncomfortable, a warmth that wasn't there before. I told myself I was imagining things, but doubt had already taken root, and it was growing with every passing day. The unease I felt after finding that hotel receipt was impossible to shake. I wanted to trust them, both my son and my wife. But the nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. Something was wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. The days passed in a blur, and my suspicions only grew. Emma continued coming home late, often with a flimsy excuse about extra meetings or faculty obligations. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to always be studying. I knew he had a busy schedule, but something about the way he avoided eye contact when I asked about his day. The hotel receipt lingered in the back of my mind like a thorn I couldn't pull out. One night, I casually asked Emma how work was going, testing the waters. She didn't seem fazed. Her face relaxed as she told me about some new grading system they were implementing. I nodded along, trying to suppress the discomfort creeping up inside me. But there was something about the way she moved, her nervous fidgeting, that set off alarms in my head. That same evening, Ethan called again, this time asking for more money. He said the hotel was helping him focus on his studies and giving him the peace he needed. The alarm bells rang louder. He had never asked for money like this before, and certainly not to rent hotel rooms. The dots in my mind were connecting, but I didn't want to believe it. "Why do you need to stay in a hotel, Ethan? What's wrong with your dorm?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my throat was tightening. "It's just easier, Dad," he replied quickly, avoiding my gaze. "The dorm is too loud, and I can't get any work done." His response was too quick, too rehearsed. I nodded, handing him the money, but inside I was screaming. What was going on between them? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was getting harder to ignore the growing distance between us all. A few days later, I noticed something else, a lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne on Emma's clothes. I didn't wear that brand, and Ethan had never worn cologne before. At first, I thought it might be something she picked up from work, perhaps a colleague, but it clung to her sweaters and jackets, even after she came home late. It felt too deliberate, too close. And the smell? It was familiar. I couldn't quite place it, but my mind was racing. I tried to distract myself, diving deeper into my work, spending more time at the office to avoid coming home to this tense atmosphere. But the more I tried to push it away, the stronger the suspicion became. Emma and Ethan seemed to find excuses to stay out late, often claiming they were both busy with their university schedules. It was becoming too much to ignore. Then, one weekend, I came home early. I hadn't told either of them that my plans had changed, so I expected to find the house empty or Emma busy with her own things. But as I walked in, I heard them talking in hushed voices. The way they spoke, laughing quietly, was different, intimate. It didn't sound like the usual casual banter between stepmother and stepson. I froze just outside the door, heart pounding in my chest. My hand gripped the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Instead, I stepped back, leaving the house without them knowing I had ever been there. My mind raced. I needed to know what was happening. It was time to stop pretending everything was fine. That night, I lay in bed next to Emma, my mind racing as she slept soundly beside me. My thoughts spiraled into 100 directions, imagining the worst. I could feel my trust slipping away, replaced by paranoia. Was I losing my mind? Or was I finally seeing the truth? The next day, I decided to confront Ethan. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly doubting, constantly wondering. I found him in the kitchen, making himself a late breakfast. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. "Ethan," I started, my voice steady despite the tension I felt. "Can we talk for a minute?" He nodded, taking a seat at the kitchen table. I sat across from him, searching his face for any sign of guilt. "What's going on with you and Emma?" I asked bluntly, not bothering with pleasantries. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Ethan's face twisted with confusion, or was it something else? "What do you mean, Dad?" "Nothing's going on." I didn't believe him. "You two have been spending a lot of time together. She's coming home late, you're asking for hotel money. Something's off." Ethan's eyes darkened for a brief moment before he forced a smile. "Dad, you're overthinking this. Emma's been busy at work, and I'm just trying to focus on my studies. There's nothing more to it." But his words didn't ease the knot in my stomach. I wanted to believe him, but the little things kept adding up: the late nights, the hotel stays, the shared glances between them. Later that night, I lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling while Emma slept beside me. The thoughts churned in my mind until I made a decision. I had to know the truth. I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. The trust one had built with both of them was crumbling, and I needed proof one way or another. That's when I reached out to Mark, my old friend who worked as a private investigator. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I knew he'd be discreet. I explained the situation to him over the phone, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt for even suspecting them. "I'll take care of it," Mark said calmly. "I'll start tailing them, see if anything comes up." The weight of my suspicions felt lighter, knowing that someone else was looking into it. But at the same time, I dreaded what Mark might uncover. What if my worst fears were true? A few days passed, and Mark sent me updates regularly. At first, there was nothing unusual. Emma and Ethan both seemed to be going about their lives as usual. But then Mark called me one evening, his tone serious. "I've got something," he said. "It's not looking good." My heart sank as I waited for him to continue. "I've got photos of them meeting at a hotel. Just the two of them." I couldn't breathe. My worst fears were coming true. This wasn't just in my head, it was real. Emma and Ethan had crossed a line I never imagined they would. Mark's words echoed in my head. "It's not looking good." I sat in silence, gripping the phone tightly, my mind racing with disbelief. Emma and Ethan, how could they betray me like this? I asked Mark to send the photos, though part of me didn't want to see the evidence. But I needed proof. If this was really happening, I couldn't just rely on suspicion. The email notification pinged. My hands trembled as I opened the message. There they were, Emma and Ethan, caught together. The first photo showed them walking into a hotel lobby. They weren't holding hands or anything incriminating, but the closeness was enough. The second photo hit harder, Emma laughing, her face glowing in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Ethan was beside her, leaning in, his posture relaxed. They looked too comfortable, too familiar. I stared at the photos for what felt like hours. I had known something was wrong, but seeing it confirmed shattered something inside me. I felt a wave of nausea rise. My wife and my son, how could they do this to me? Was it all just a game to them? I wanted to confront them both right then and there, to scream, to demand answers. But I knew I needed more. If I charged in now, they could deny it, twist the story, and I'd be left with nothing but my suspicions. No, I needed to know the full truth. I picked up the phone and called Mark again. "Keep following them," I said, my voice low but firm. "I need more proof. I need to be sure." Mark didn't ask any questions, and I was grateful for that. He agreed to continue the surveillance, and I hung up, feeling both hollow and enraged. The next few days were torture. I went through the motions of my daily life, pretending everything was normal, but inside, I was crumbling. Emma would come home late, as usual, offering the same weak excuses. I nodded and smiled, but every time she touched me, it felt like a lie. Ethan stayed out more than ever. He barely spoke to me when he was home, and when he did, it was short, casual conversation, nothing like the bond we used to share. I watched him closely, searching for any signs of guilt, but he seemed completely at ease. It sickened me to see how easily he carried on, as if nothing was happening. Was he really that shameless? Mark continued sending updates. They were still meeting more hotels, more late nights. I started losing sleep, lying awake, replaying every moment I'd missed, every sign I should have seen. How long had this been going on? Was I a fool from the beginning? Mark sent me video footage. It was a short clip, recorded from a distance, but it was clear enough. Ethan and Emma were in the university library, sitting together in a quiet corner. At first, they were just talking, but then Emma reached out, placing her hand on his arm. Ethan didn't pull away. In fact, he leaned in closer, his voice low, his smile easy. The intimacy between them was undeniable. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, smash something, anything, but instead, I just sat there, numb. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some misunderstanding. They had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. I spent the rest of the night pacing the living room, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't confront them without risking a lie or some clever manipulation. Emma was good with words. She'd always been able to talk her way out of situations. And Ethan, he'd probably act innocent, claim it was nothing serious. But this was serious. This was my wife. This was my son. The next day, I met with Mark in person. He laid out everything: dates, times, photos, videos. The evidence was overwhelming. Emma and Ethan had been seeing each other regularly, mostly in secret, but occasionally in public as well. The hotel meetings were no longer just about studying. They were something else entirely. I felt like a fool, realizing how deep their betrayal went. Mark handed me the last stack of photos, and I hesitated before taking them. Did I really want to see more? Could I handle it? "You need to know everything," Mark said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. "It's better this way." I nodded, flipping through the photos. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. There they were laughing, walking side by side, too close for comfort. In one of the photos, they were sitting in a cafe, leaning in toward each other, Emma's hand resting on Ethan's leg. I couldn't look anymore. How long do you think this has been going on? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark paused, looking at me with sympathy. From what I can gather, it's been a few months. It's hard to say exactly when it started, but it's clear they've gotten comfortable. Months. They had been sneaking around for months, right under my nose. I felt a surge of anger, followed by an overwhelming sense of defeat. How had I missed it? Had I been so blind, so trusting? What are you going to do? Mark asked, his voice gentle. I didn't have an answer. I was caught between the urge to explode and the need to stay calm, to figure out how to confront this without losing my mind. I thanked Mark for his work, paid him, and left, feeling a heavy weight settle on my chest. When I got home that evening, I found Emma in the kitchen, cooking dinner like nothing had changed. She smiled at me as I walked in, her eyes soft and loving. It made my stomach churn. How was your day? She asked casually, turning back to the stove. Fine, I muttered, barely able to look at her. She had no idea that I knew, that I had seen everything. I stood there, watching her, wondering how someone could be so cruel, so deceitful. The woman I thought I knew was a stranger now, and I couldn't bear to be near her. Ethan came home later that night, his usual carefree self. He greeted me with a nod, barely looking up from his phone. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to confront him right then and there. But I couldn't not yet. I needed to think this through. I needed to make sure that when I confronted them, they wouldn't be able to weasel their way out of it. I went to bed that night, lying next to Emma, feeling like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. The weight of knowing everything, of seeing the undeniable proof, hung over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't look at Emma or Ethan. Every smile from her felt like a mockery, every casual greeting from him like a slap to the face. I had all the proof I needed, yet I still found myself paralyzed by the shock of it all. How had I let it get this far? I had trusted them, believed in our family, and they had torn it apart. Days passed, and I remained silent. I knew a confrontation was inevitable, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to make sure I was in control when it happened, that they couldn't talk their way out of this. But the more I delayed, the more the rage built inside me, boiling just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. One evening, after another long day of pretending everything was normal, I sat at the dinner table, watching them. Emma was chatting about her day, telling me some pointless story about a faculty meeting. Ethan sat across from me, nodding along as if he cared. But all I could think about was how they had lied to me, how they had betrayed me over and over again. Every time they smiled at each other, every shared glance, made me sick to my core. I have to head back to campus later tonight, Emma said casually. There's a lecture I'm helping organize, and I need to make sure everything is set up properly. Ethan didn't say anything, but I could see the flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. I knew what they were planning: another meeting, another secret rendezvous. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my anger in check, but I couldn't hold it back any longer. When are you going to stop lying to me? The words slipped out before I could stop them, my voice low but laced with fury. Emma froze, her hand pausing midair as she brought the wine glass to her lips. Ethan's eyes darted to mine, confusion or maybe guilt flickering across his face. What are you talking about? Emma asked, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. You and Ethan. I know everything. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma's face went pale, and she set her wine glass down slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile illusion she'd been living in. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but he didn't say a word. Don't play dumb, I continued, my voice trembling with the weight of months of bottled-up suspicion and anger. I've seen the photos, the videos, the hotel meetings. You think I wouldn't notice? Emma's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with panic. The truth was laid bare now, and there was no escape. How long has this been going on? I demanded, my voice rising. How long have you two been sneaking around behind my back? Ethan finally spoke, his voice shaky. Dad, it's not what you think. Don't lie to me. I've seen everything. You can't talk your way out of this. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. It just did? That was her excuse? I felt my chest tighten with rage. How could she sit there, apologizing like this was some minor mistake, like she'd accidentally forgotten to pick up milk from the store? You didn't mean for it to happen? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. So what was it? Just a mistake? A lapse in judgment? Emma sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know what happened. I turned to Ethan, who looked like he wanted to disappear. And you? What's your excuse? My own son, betraying me like this? He didn't answer, his head hanging low. He couldn't even look me in the eye. It was pathetic. The room was filled with the sound of Emma's sobs, but it did nothing to soften my heart. I had no sympathy left for her, for either of them. All I felt was anger, betrayal, and a deep, gnawing hatred for the life I had been living, a life built on lies. How long? I asked again, my voice cold. How long have you been lying to me? Emma finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. A few months, she admitted, her voice barely audible. A few months. The words echoed in my head, but it felt like a lifetime. They had been doing this for months, right under my nose, and I had been too blind to see it. I had trusted them both, and they had thrown it back in my face. I stood up from the table, unable to bear their presence any longer. Get out, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Emma looked up, startled. What? You heard me. Get out of this house. Both of you. She hesitated, as if she couldn't believe what I was saying. Please, just let me explain. I don't want to hear it. I shouted, the fury bubbling to the surface. I don't care what you have to say. You've already destroyed everything. Get out. Emma flinched, but she didn't argue. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling as she gathered her things. Ethan remained seated, his face pale, as if he didn't know what to do. I'll leave tonight, Emma whispered, her voice broken. But please, don't do this. I didn't do this, Emma. I spat. You did. With that, I turned and left the room, slamming the door behind me. I couldn't bear to watch them any longer, couldn't stand the sight of the two people I had loved more than anything, knowing what they had done to me. I went upstairs, locking myself in the bedroom. The weight of the betrayal settled heavily on my chest, suffocating me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, trying to process everything. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but beneath it was something worse, a hollow, aching sense of loss. My marriage, my family, my life as I knew it was all gone. And for what? For some secret affair, for a betrayal I could never have predicted. I didn't know how long I sat there, lost in my thoughts, but eventually, the sound of the front door closing brought me back to reality. They were gone. Emma and Ethan had left, and I was alone in the house we had once called home. The silence was deafening. I got up, walking through the empty house, every room filled with memories that now felt tainted, corrupted by what had happened. The life I had built, the love I had given it had all been for nothing. I had been a fool, and they had taken advantage of my trust. But as the night wore on, my anger began to shift. I was no longer just angry at them, I was determined. This wasn't going to end here. Emma thought she could walk away with a few apologies, but I wasn't going to let her off that easily. I wanted revenge. It was eerie, the silence wrapping around me like a shroud. But beneath that stillness, a storm brewed inside me. The betrayal was too deep, too unforgivable, and I knew I couldn't just let them walk away without consequences. I had been wronged, and I was going to make them pay. The idea of revenge had already started to take shape in my mind. It wasn't enough for Emma and Ethan to feel guilty. I wanted them to experience the full weight of what they had done to me. They had turned my life upside down, ripped apart my family, and shattered any sense of trust one once had. I couldn't let that slide. They needed to understand that betrayal comes with a price. The first step in my plan was simple. I cut off Ethan financially. I had been supporting him throughout his time at university, paying for his tuition, rent, and living expenses. It was time for him to experience life without my help. He could fend for himself from now on. I transferred all of his funds back into my own account and blocked his access to the money I had set aside for him. If he wanted to live his life independently, he would have to figure it out without me. But that was just the beginning. Emma was still my wife, and though she had left, we hadn't yet discussed what would happen next. Divorce seemed inevitable, but I wasn't going to let her walk away with half of everything I had built. I contacted my lawyer the next morning, explaining the situation. I wanted to make sure that, legally, I could use the evidence of her affair to gain leverage in the divorce proceedings. The photos, the videos, they would all be used to my advantage. Emma would get as little as possible. But even that didn't feel like enough. I wanted to hurt her, just as she had hurt me. Rachel was someone I'd met a few months ago through work. She was younger than Emma, gorgeous, and full of life. We had been friendly, but nothing had ever come of it. I had been married, after all. But now? Now I was free to do whatever I wanted. And if I was going to get revenge on Emma, what better way than to show her that she was replaceable? I reached out to Rachel, inviting her for drinks. I didn't have to wait long for a response. She agreed, seemingly eager to meet up. It wasn't difficult to charm her. After all, I had spent years building a successful business, providing for my family, and being the kind of man people respected. Rachel saw that, and she was drawn to it. We laughed, we flirted, and by the end of the night, it was clear that she was interested in more than just casual conversation. It felt good to be wanted again, especially after what Emma had done. It felt like control, like I was reclaiming something that had been taken from me. As the night went on, we moved from the bar to a nearby restaurant, and then, inevitably, back to my place. I made sure to take Rachel to the house I had shared with Emma. I wanted Emma to know that someone else was there now, that she had been replaced. The house that had once been ours was now mine alone, and I was determined to fill it with new memories, ones that didn't involve her. Rachel and I spent more time together in the following weeks. She was everything Emma wasn't: spontaneous, fun, and unburdened by the weight of deceit. She didn't know about the drama unfolding in my personal life, and I didn't tell her. I kept her at arm's length emotionally, using her as a means to an end. She was a part of my plan, an instrument in my revenge. I made sure Emma knew about Rachel. I wasn't subtle about it. I posted photos of us together on social media, something I had rarely done during my marriage. I wanted Emma to see them, to feel the sting of being replaced so easily. And it worked. A few weeks later, Emma called me. I could hear the hurt in her voice as she asked about Rachel, trying to act casual but failing miserably. "I saw your photos online," she said, her voice tight. "Who is she? Why does it matter?" I replied coldly, "You're the one who left." Emma hesitated, as if she didn't know what to say next. "I didn't think you'd move on so quickly." I almost laughed at the irony. "Really? You didn't think I'd move on? After what you did with Ethan?" There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost picture her face, stunned, maybe even a little embarrassed. "Good. Let her feel that. It's not the same," she finally whispered, but the words were hollow. "Isn't it?" I snapped. "You betrayed me, Emma. You and my own son. Did you think I was just going to sit here and wait for you to come crawling back?" I could hear her breathing on the other end, shaky and uneven. She was breaking, just like I wanted her to. "I didn't want it to be like this," she murmured, her voice cracking. "I never meant for this to happen." I clenched my jaw, barely able to contain my anger. "Well, it did happen. And now you're going to live with the consequences." I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding in my chest. The satisfaction I had expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness. I had hurt her, but the pain she caused me hadn't disappeared. If anything, it felt sharper, more present than ever. The revenge I sought wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. But it wasn't over yet. The divorce proceedings began soon after that. As I predicted, Emma tried to fight for her share of our assets, but the evidence of her affair made it difficult for her to argue. My lawyer was relentless, using every piece of evidence I had collected to ensure that Emma walked away with as little as possible. It wasn't just about the money, it was about making sure she felt the consequences of her actions. The court ruled in my favor. Emma was left with a fraction of what she had hoped for, and she was forced to move out of the city. Ethan? I hadn't spoken to him since the confrontation. I heard through mutual contacts that he had dropped out of university, likely struggling without my financial support. Part of me felt guilty for abandoning him, but I couldn't bring myself to reach out. He had chosen his path, and he would have to live with it. Rachel and I continued seeing each other, but it was clear that the relationship wasn't built to last. She was fun and beautiful, but she wasn't what I needed. In the end, she became just another casualty of the war I had started against Emma. Eventually, we parted ways, both knowing that we were never meant to be anything more than temporary. With Emma gone and Rachel out of the picture, I was left alone in the house that had once been full of life. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't filled with anger or betrayal, it was just quiet. I had gotten my revenge, but it hadn't healed the wound Emma and Ethan had inflicted on me. If anything, it had only deepened the sense of loss. One evening, as I sat in the empty living room, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened. The anger, the revenge, the satisfaction of watching Emma and Ethan's lives fall apart. It had all been so consuming. But now, with the dust settled, I was left wondering what it had all been for. I had won, but at what cost? Revenge had given me a temporary sense of power, but it hadn't brought me peace. It hadn't healed the betrayal or erased the pain. In the end, I realized I hadn't just destroyed them, I had destroyed myself in the process. The months following the divorce were a blur. I had thought revenge would bring me some sense of closure, but the emptiness still clung to me. My life was a shadow of what it had once been, and though Emma and Ethan were out of the picture, the betrayal never fully left my mind. I had won every battle, but somehow, I still felt like I had lost the war. I had cut Ethan out of my life entirely, and as for Emma, she had been reduced to a ghost of her former self. We hadn't spoken since the divorce, and though I had heard she had moved away, I never bothered to find out where. It didn't matter. She was no longer my concern. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, the dim light of the television flickering across the empty space, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something in my gut told me to answer. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was soft, hesitant, but unmistakable. "Hi, it's Ethan." My heart stopped for a moment. I hadn't heard his voice in months, hadn't even thought about the possibility of him reaching out. I had assumed he was gone from my life for good. The silence stretched between us, thick with unresolved tension, before I finally spoke. "What do you want?" My voice was cold, detached, as if speaking to a stranger. In a way, that's what he had become. I know I don't deserve your time, Dad," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "but I need to talk to you. Face to face." After everything he had done, after the way he had betrayed me with Emma, he had no right to ask for my time. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the sound of desperation in his voice, or maybe it was the lingering curiosity that had never fully left me. What did he want to say? "Why now?" I asked, my tone still guarded. "Why do you think I'd want to see you after everything?" There was a pause, and I could hear him exhale slowly on the other end of the line. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need to explain. I need to make things right." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I considered the possibility. Could he really make things right? Was there anything left to salvage between us? The anger still simmered beneath the surface, but there was also a part of me that wanted to hear him out, to finally confront him face to face and get the answers I had been craving. "Fine," I said after a long silence. "Meet me tomorrow at the cafe on 5th Street. Noon." I hung up before he could say anything else, my heart pounding in my chest. What was I doing? Why was I giving him a chance to explain? I had no reason to trust him, but the truth was, I wanted closure. I needed to hear his side, even if it wouldn't change anything. I had no idea what to expect from this meeting. The last time I had seen Ethan, it had been during the confrontation in our kitchen, The night I had thrown him and Emma out. The memory of that night still burned in my mind, the anger and betrayal fresh as ever. I sat at a corner table, my hands gripping a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I watched the door, waiting for Ethan to arrive. And when he did, it was like a punch to the gut. He looked different, older, more worn down, as if the weight of his choices had finally caught up with him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he moved with a hesitancy that hadn't been there before. He spotted me and walked over, his step slow, almost reluctant. When he sat down across from me, neither of us spoke for a moment. "Dad," he said finally, his voice quiet. "Thanks for agreeing to meet me." I studied him, searching for the person I used to know, the son I had once been proud of. But all I could see was the shadow of the boy who had betrayed me. "You've got 5 minutes," I said, my voice hard. "Say what you need to say." Ethan nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know you hate me, and I don't blame you. I hate myself for what I did. I wish I could take it all back." His words felt rehearsed, like he had been practicing them over and over before coming here. But there was something genuine in his voice, an edge of regret that I hadn't expected. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he continued, his voice faltering. "It was a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to understand." "Understand?" I echoed, my anger flaring. "You want me to understand how you slept with my wife? How you betrayed your own father?" Ethan winced at my words, his face contorting with guilt. "It wasn't like that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It started off, it was just emotional at first. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late. I was confused, and Emma, she was there, and it just happened." The excuses were piling up, and I could feel my patience wearing thin. "You think that makes it better? You think that makes it okay?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "It doesn't. I'm not trying to justify it. I know what I did was wrong, so wrong. I hurt you in the worst way possible, and I've regretted it every single day since. I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it, Ethan," I said, my voice cold. "What's done is done. You and Emma destroyed everything, and there's no going back." I know, Dad, but I wanted to apologize. I needed to tell you that I'm sorry." I sat there, staring at him, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The apology was sincere, I could see that, but it didn't erase what he had done. It didn't undo the months of lies, the betrayal, the pain. And yet, for the first time since this all began, I could see the toll it had taken on him. He wasn't the same confident, carefree person he had once been. He was broken, just like I was. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again." Ethan nodded, his face falling. "I understand. I don't expect you to. I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to move forward, but it's hard when I know I've lost you." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so long feeling angry, so long wanting revenge, that I hadn't thought about what came after. Did I want to lose my son forever? Was this betrayal the end of everything between us? "You've lost my trust," I said slowly, my voice heavy. "And trust doesn't come back easily." Ethan looked up at me, hope flickering in his eyes. "But it can come back?" "I don't know," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. "But it's going to take time. A lot of time." Ethan nodded, wiping away the tears that had gathered in his eyes. "I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want a chance to make things right." We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of our conversation hanging over us. There was no easy resolution, no instant forgiveness. But for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but it was something. As I stood to leave, Ethan reached out, his hand trembling. "Dad, thank you for giving me a chance to talk." I looked down at him, my emotions still raw, my anger still simmering. But there was a part of me that wanted to believe in redemption, that wanted to believe my son could change. "We'll see," I said quietly, turning and walking out of the cafe, leaving Ethan behind. The confrontation was over, but the journey ahead was just beginning. Walking out of the cafe that day felt like closing a chapter one never wanted to read in the first place. The confrontation with Ethan had stirred up emotions I thought I had buried: anger, betrayal, pain, but also a sliver of hope. Despite everything he had done, he was still my son, and while trust might never fully return, I wasn't ready to sever the bond completely. The days that followed were quiet, and I found myself reflecting on everything. The revenge, the rage, the satisfaction of seeing Emma and Ethan's lives fall apart. It hadn't brought the peace I craved. I had thought that watching them suffer would somehow fix the hurt inside me, but it hadn't. It had only left a void. The truth was, I wasn't the same man I had been before this betrayal. I couldn't be. Justice had been served in a legal sense. The divorce settlement had left Emma with far less than she expected, and Ethan had struggled to find his footing after I cut off his financial support. I had been ruthless, and for a while, that had been enough for me. But now, with the dust settling, I couldn't help but wonder if I had been too harsh. Had my revenge gone too far? Had I destroyed too much in the process of trying to protect myself? One afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer, who had been handling the final steps of the divorce. "It's all officially over," he said, his tone businesslike. "The court has signed off on everything. You're free." Free. The word felt strange. I had been chasing that feeling for months, trying to free myself from the weight of betrayal, from the pain of what Emma and Ethan had done. But hearing it now didn't bring the relief I had expected. If anything, it felt hollow. The days turned into weeks, and though I had regained my independence, there was a loneliness that lingered in the quiet spaces of my life. The house felt too big, too empty. The absence of Emma, the silence from Ethan, it all weighed on me more than I wanted to admit. I had achieved my goal, but now, standing in the aftermath, I wondered what was left for me. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I received an unexpected message. It was from Emma. For a moment, I considered ignoring it after everything that had happened. I didn't think there was anything left to say. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message. It was short, just a few lines. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've been trying to figure out how everything went so wrong, and I don't have any answers. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for what happened, but for everything that led us here. I hope you can find peace, even if it's without me." I stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Her apology felt genuine, but it was far too late. The damage had already been done, and there was no going back. But there was something in her words that stirred something in me. It wasn't about forgiving her, it was about letting go. Holding on to the anger, the hatred, the desire for revenge. It had consumed me for too long. Maybe it was time to let go of it all. I didn't reply to her message. There was nothing to say, but I didn't delete it either. Instead, I let it sit there as a reminder of everything I had been through, and as a sign that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to move forward. As the weeks went by, I slowly began rebuilding my life. I focused on my work, on expanding my business, and on finding new hobbies to fill the empty spaces. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The wounds Emma and Ethan had left behind were deep, but I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. One morning, as I was getting ready to leave for the office, I received a surprise visitor. Ethan. He stood at the door, looking unsure of himself, holding something in his hand. It was a letter. "I know I've said this before," he began, his voice low, "but I wanted to write it all down. I didn't want to leave anything unsaid. You don't have to read it now, or ever, but I needed to give this to you." I took the letter from him, staring at it for a moment before looking back at him. "Why now?" I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. "Because I don't want to lose you, Dad," he said, his eyes filled with remorse. "I've lost so much already, and I know it's my fault, but I want to try to make things right. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to start over." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to push him away, to remind him of the pain he had caused, but another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, the bond we once had, wanted to believe he could change, that we could heal. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice softer than I expected. Ethan nodded, his face a mix of relief and uncertainty. That's all I can ask for. Thank you." He left shortly after, and I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter still in my hands. I wasn't ready to read it yet, but I knew I would eventually. For now, it was enough that he had made the effort, that he was trying. Maybe that was all I could ask for. As the days went by, I started to feel lighter, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. The anger was still there, but it wasn't consuming me anymore. I had spent so long seeking revenge, trying to make Emma and Ethan pay for what they had done, that I hadn't realized how much it was costing me. Now, as I began to let go of that need for justice, I could finally see a path forward. Justice had been served in the legal sense, but resolution was something entirely different. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about finding peace with what had happened and moving on. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could do that. I didn't know what the future held for me, or for Ethan, or even for Emma. But I knew one thing. I was done with the past. The betrayal had scarred me, but it hadn't broken me. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. One evening, as I sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that I was ready to move forward. The house was still quiet, still filled with echoes of what had been, but it didn't feel as empty anymore. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side. Maybe that was the real justice. Not the divorce, not the revenge, but the fact that I was still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to start living again. The journey wasn't over, but I was finally ready to take the next step. And this time, I was doing it on my own terms. As I sat there, the cool evening air brushing against my skin, I realized that I didn't need revenge or anger to move forward. I just needed the will to keep going. And for the first time, I believed that I could. Justice had been served. But more importantly, I had found my resolution.